Hey everybody, Dave here. This video is part 4 of the series that I'm calling Basics of Application Modeler. If you haven't watched part 1, 2, and 3, I'd suggest to watch those first. Otherwise, we're going to jump right into part 4 where we talk about the SPY modes, Win32, AA, and UIA. Now that we have looked at HTML elements and a little bit about spying them and some of the best practices that I would suggest whenever you are choosing attributes for them and then remembering to change the element type sometimes, some of those same things apply whenever you're working with Win32, active accessibility, and UIA mode, but I want to go ahead and actually go through the motions of creating attributes for those as well. So I'm going to start here with Win32 and then move into the other two, and they may or may not be in a separate video. So I'm going to go ahead and take the same application model that we've already defined, and I'm going to clear these and respy each of them in a different mode. Before we get into active accessibility and UIA mode, I want to cover Win32. So I'm going to create another element, and we're going to, actually no, we're going to call this, we're going to do it up here. Let's see, screen homepage. Identify, okay, and notice that we've got HTML mode. Press the Alt key, and now we've got Win32 mode. You can't see it. There it is. So I can't put my mouse over it, otherwise it'll disappear on me. So it's going to the other side of the screen. You just can't see it in your view of my desktop. So on the left side, you see that it has Win32 mode, and if I move around, you can see that it identifies a lot of pieces on the in the browser, but none of which is going to be inside of the web page. The HTML part of the page is not accessible to Win32 mode. However, it is still very useful. And one of the things I very commonly do is I'll spy the entire window and in Win32 mode, and I'll use that for activate application. So I've just spied the whole window. Sometimes I'll just do like, an inner frame or whatever, but the whole window should generally work. So it's an element type of window, and I'll briefly mention this. I'm not even going to go over these others because I think they're very self-explanatory. If you watched the HTML video, you saw me change the element types, and that can affect the actions available in navigate stage. So let's just do that for one of them here. So this is a window type element. I'll click OK, go to the navigate stage, add the screen home page in, and then you can see I have activate application, click window center, close, drag, drop. Got a couple global mouse click things, hide window, maximize, move, resize, whatever, like a whole bunch of stuff, very useful things. And then if I click OK, go back to application modeler, and I change this to something like a button, right? Click OK, go back in the navigate stage and change to the action. You'll see that there's a limited set of actions available to me, and that's because buttons can't do all the same things that windows can do. So I want to make sure that you recognize that that is absolutely a thing, and even to a larger degree with Windows, with Win32 spy mode. Same thing with the rest of these, and it doesn't even matter that the element isn't a tree view. I can select tree view, click OK, go in the navigate stage, change the action. You can see collapse item, expand item, whatever else. And so it's important to choose the right element type, but those will not work if I were to run it on anything in this web page right now, or I guess on the window itself, because that's what I just spied. Okay, so back to this. Element types are important. I'm going to leave it as window, and then I'm going to do my best practice. Okay, looks like there's none that are selected that have an empty value. Even Win32, the next thing I'll do is just verify, do any of these look like they might change while the application is running? And if the answer is probably, because visible and screen visible, I believe, can change. I've tested it some. Seems like it happens, right? Because it's screen visible. If it's not visible on the screen, it's not. So, that has a possibility of changing. But the bigger important best practice that I suggested in the HTML video or section of this video, however I organized it, I don't have a good reason for using visible and screen visible. There are no windows that are invisible that match these parameters. So I'm going to deselect these, and I'm going to reorder, right? We've got window text Google Internet Explorer enabled, and this is a case when enabled is actually very important. Win32 enabled is definitely used. So if I had a pop-up, let's say, let's see, can I cause like a modal pop-up to happen over here? Print maybe? Okay, so in this case, you see how when I try to click this background over here, this window is not enabled right now. So if I try to spy this or highlight it, you'll see unable to match the window with the query terms. If I click cancel, now it will be able to find it because it's enabled again. So the enabled attribute is actually useful. And the way that you know whether it's enabled or disabled is what's called a modal dialog pop-up. If you do something that causes you to be unable to click the window below, this is considered a modal dialog, which is now an enabled window, and it disables the window beneath. Okay, so in this case, I do want it to be like this because if something happens and it causes me to be unable to find this window when I'm trying to work with it, I actually want it to throw an error and not work and not pretend like it works, right? Like if it's disabled, it could still find it as disabled back there. Matter of fact, let's just explore that, right? While we're here. Okay, so we've got the modal dialog up, and I can't click this back here. It's disabled. But if I change, either I deselect this, click highlight, it'll find it. I can also check the enabled and change to false, and it'll highlight it. I can also change to true and say not equal to true, and it'll find it. There's a number of different ways to do that. And then, but I'm going to leave it here as enabled equals true, so it should not be able to find it. It'll throw an error for me whenever I try to work with it when that's disabled. Class name, this is a time when actually I think that it is fine to leave the class because this IE frame, this is not going to change. This will always be IE frame. And I think that it does help narrow it down because if I deselected this, I could have a window open like Notepad++ that has the same name and it would conflict with finding it. So if I have the class name as IE frame, then it'll narrow it down to specifically something in Internet Explorer rather than conflicting with other applications. I already talked about with HTML, I talked about X and Y and how those aren't usually good to use unless you're using them for a reason. Same thing for width. If there was another window that's conflicting with this one that's invisible, let's say, then maybe you could use this to go like width greater than, but you don't want to select width equal to 779, for example, 779 pixels. Unable to match the query terms. Okay, wait. Okay, so it'll find it because I haven't resized the window since I spied it. But if I resize the window even slightly now, it's not going to be able to find it anymore. If I say that the window is greater than 10, it'll find it again because the pixels is greater than 10. So I'm going to deselect that though and not use it. Ordinal, maybe this was true in the past that ordinal was a useful attribute. I have found it to be extremely unreliable, and I would suggest you just absolutely never use ordinal. Ordinal being order, like it's kind of like match index, I imagine, except that ordinal may be something that the application actually defines itself. But I found various apps to change what the ordinal number is for certain elements. I have no explanation for that. All I know is that is like I confirmed that to be the case. And I have since then never gone back to ordinal, especially because it's only useful in Win32. Can't remember, but I don't think it's in active accessibility in UIA. I'll have to go see. But match index is always going to be your best friend, and you can pretty much always choose it unless, again, you want it to throw an error if there are two windows with the same title in this case. So, right, so it's still finding it. And you could not have match index selected in the case of Win32. It'll still find it really fast because usually Win32 is extremely fast. Okay, so let me show you now what I primarily use that for, and that is activate application. So I have screen selected, activate application. This is what you need to use whenever you use send keys. So, there's more you need to normally do with this, but I'm going to click into that box. Let's see if this works. Then I'll add here, do like excursion. Oh, here. I'm crazy. So do the root node and then global send keys, and then we'll just send some random text. And we'll put pause after each step of 0.5 seconds. Reset and do this. So what it did was it activated the application, so it brings it to the foreground, and then you saw really quickly, I'll do it one more time, I don't know why I don't know why it typed ROM that time, whatever. But anyway, it typed random into the blank. Now, granted, recognize that I would need something in between here to actually like click into this blank. I kind of simulated that by clicking into it ahead of time so that when it activated this application, this element was already selected. But this is the main reason, or the main way that I use this type of an element, this Win32. There's another way that I use it too that's less often, and I only do this when I really need it, but that is minimizing and then maximizing a window. That sometimes there will be other windows on the desktop that will just want to take control of everything, and the best way that I found to bring an application to the foreground is using minimize, maximize. Or maybe it's just a second way that'll do it. So I'll put like a 2-second wait in between these. So it should minimize, wait 2 seconds, maximize, wait 2 seconds, and then let the process flow continue. So let's play it. So it minimizes it and then maximizes it. Not only is it at a stable size of a screen, but it's also, in the foreground. And so now I can send keys to it or whatever else. All right, now we're back in Application Modeler, and I'm just scrolling through this list to see if there's anything else that may be useful to use. Match reverse is also here. I suspect that that's not usually going to be necessary. Win32 is so fast, and typically match reverse is used to search from the bottom if there's a lot of elements. So if you are using an application that Win32 works with, has a lot of elements, you could use match reverse. I typically don't use most of these other attributes. Sometimes ancestor text I feel like might have text in it, but that often also might just equal window text. And I think that's about it for the basics of working with Win32. Some things to recognize with Win32 is that because it can go so much faster, that's one of those times when you really notice the need for intelligent wait stages. Every single thing you change on the screen for a for Win32 spy mode, like when you're working with that way, always have an intelligent wait after every click to change the screen. You enter a value into a field that should then be read by the app and update the screen somehow. Moving from one screen to another, opening the app, closing the app, whatever. You should always have an intelligent wait after it just to make sure that something is the case or is not the case. Is a window here? Yes, it is. Or is the window gone now? Okay, good. I can move on because it runs so fast. We're going to compare HTML, UIA, and active accessibility, and it's really just going to come down to you testing how things work in each app and get familiar with the different types of attributes. I think the information I've given so far is a good start. And we can definitely get more advanced, but I'm finding that I'm making this video extremely long, so I'm going to try to limit what more I talk about. So I'm going to spy HTML for this image. Okay, so let's do that 3 times. I'm going to make these children for active accessibility. There's an error. Okay, so I'm just doing it too fast. So kind of go a little bit slower sometimes when you're changing the spy modes. So here's UIA mode and active accessibility. Have to cycle through these by pressing Alt. Active accessibility I actually tend to use more than UIA mode, but something to recognize is that Microsoft did come out with UIA as opposed to active accessibility. So UIA is newer and it's supposed to replace AA mode. But what I found, at least in Blue Prism, is that it doesn't have the same capabilities exactly, and one works better than the other in some cases. So I find that you kind of just go back and forth between the two. Active accessibility at this point may not be in Chrome. I think that it's not in Chrome automation. So you would only have UIA as an alternative to HTML. And you just be going back and forth between those two. But in Internet Explorer, AA mode still works great, so I use it. Let's look at this. Oh, okay, right. So let's just remove these blanks. You'll already see it's not looking great for UIA mode. Active accessibility, remove the blanks. And now that this has come up, I'll treat any value that says self as blank, because self is not a descriptive, limiter. It's not going to help me narrow down to a certain element. Okay. All right. You can see that between UIA and AA, there's a lot more active accessibility attributes than there are UIA. Don't let that fool you though, because most of them are not useful. If I sort by value, and then you'll see that a whole bunch of them are Boolean values, true or false. And I would imagine that many of these, you went through and you checked them all, that it's impossible to get some of these to actually change. No matter how you interact with the window, you can't get these to change to true or to change to false. So what you want to look for when you are picking elements or picking attributes to help you identify a certain element is to, again, narrow down to the smallest list possible of reliable attributes. Parent role link, that might be useful. Parent default action could be useful, but I'm going to remove it for now. Class name, Internet Explorer Server. I don't see anything wrong with that. That might help us. And then the value, we're going to do the same thing here as I did with HTML and change it to wildcard like this. We'll go ahead and put our star here in case we have other environments that we're working with. I'm going to say, since these are the same, that we probably don't need this. In this case, I'm actually going to use parent value and change this to wildcard, remove value, and then role graphic. That's helpful because that narrows to an image. And let's get a match index in here. Okay, so we can find the image. It's working. That doesn't mean that it's going to continue to be reliable. Oh, here's ancestor text. That's actually one that I often use. That can be useful. And then you don't necessarily need this URL because I can do this. But maybe I should explain actually what I just did too. I typically don't like when there's extra spaces at the beginning or the end of a value. And so I'll usually change that to stars and then the match type to wildcard. And I have done this for years now, and this has worked well for me. It's not always perfect. There are times when this part can change. So, you could even do this if you know there's only going to be one window of Internet Explorer open, but sometimes you need to have multiple open at the same time. So element count 0 could be useful, but I'm going to deselect it and force myself to determine I need it later. Parent role link, we'll remove that. Enabled, we will remove that and highlight. Okay, so it looks like we're good on this, and we followed a similar pattern that I did for HTML, where you're just kind of limiting to as few as possible, and you know why you're using them. So if I look through these, I know that this is sort of like the window text that's up here, and I'm matching to the window, but I also kind of want to match to the URL that's up here. That helps me to know that I'm on the right page too. So maybe I could just have one of these, but for now I'm going to use them both because they are true values. Class name, I'm using, actually I don't need class name, so I'm glad that I looked over that. I don't need class name? Wow, look how much slower that was. So this is what we can learn through testing. If I check that back again, what was it, class name? Let's organize by name, go down to class name, sort on match type, or on match. It's finding it faster with Internet Explorer Server selected. So I don't have an explanation for you on that. Let me know in the comments if you know why that is. But the fact that I'm seeing an improved performance by having it selected, I'm going to leave it there. Let's jump over to UIA and try to see if we can do the same thing. What I often find is that UIA just does not have enough specific identifiers to be able to narrow it down without using match index 5 or match index 6 or some crazy thing like that. So I can't use the name of the element. Image works. We'll probably want match index. I guess if it's a hyperlink, then that helps us narrow it down further. Wait, what is this? This is control type. Okay. UIA height. Okay. We'll probably want to do this because we know that there's that other image that's on the page. So we'll go like height greater than 40. And it still, it identifies it. Let's sort on match. So we have match index, control type, UIA control type. So we got the parent control type and the UIA control type. So it's an image and its parent is a hyperlink. So when you click it, it's using the parent's link to go somewhere. So if I click on it, yep, it takes me somewhere. All right, good to know. And so I would have to say this is UIA is not what I would use in this case. I'd use HTML or AA because I feel like those are a little bit better. One thing I really don't like about UIA is that it frequently doesn't give me the ability to identify what window it's working with. Sometimes that can be good because maybe it just doesn't care what window I'm working with. But I typically like to have a positive, specific recognition of this is the window I'm dealing with because it has this window title. And I know it has that window title. If it has anything else, I want it to fail. Because one of the important things for me is that the robot only does exactly what it's supposed to do and cannot have the possibility of doing anything else. And that if it would just fail. We got the same thing here again. I'm going to go look at the navigate stage for this element and see what kind of actions we got. Drag, drop, focus, verify, global stuff. And then if I go back to application model, change this to be like a menu item, and then navigate, focus. Okay, so it gave us, I think it gave us some different elements or different actions. Let's try tab control. That should be different. Yeah, select tab. So it'll change it based upon the type of element that it is as well for UIA. Let's try AA now for this. Okay, so we've got default, drag, drop, focus, some of the same stuff. If I go into application model. So I think that you've likely seen that this is very similar. Wow, just verify. Okay. That UIA and AA are very similar, and the reason for that is that UIA is a replacement for AA. It's just a bad replacement. It has its purpose, but it's not great. Blue Prism has not always had UIA mode. I remember when it came out and everybody was like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. I'm going to be able to identify things I've never been able to identify before. And in some cases, it's true. Like in various apps, UIA will help you to identify like a contextual pop-up that Win32 couldn't identify. And obviously, if it's a desktop app, HTML is not going to help you. AA might have a hard time with it, and UIA was able to do it. So there are times when it's very useful. But in my opinion, it should be your last choice before using surface automation. You should first try to use Win32 because it's so fast and reliable. Then if it's in a web page, try to use HTML. Next, active accessibility. And then after that, UIA mode. I wanted to mention that another thing that is better about AA mode compared to UIA is that AA has match reverse and UIA does not. I don't know why that is. I think Blue Prism could include it. I should probably ask for it to be included, and maybe they'll do it. I don't know. So if you're trying to spy a web page using UIA or AA, and an element is way down at the bottom of the page, I'm going to use AA every time because I can do match index 1 or match index 2 or whatever it is I need, and match reverse true so that it looks from the bottom up. And that's all I have for you for those other types of spy modes. I know that I have really focused on HTML and describing that, but what I really feel like is that the types of things I described kind of apply to all of them, and the only differences between them is some of the types of controls on the page, some types of elements, and then some of the actions you can do with them. But the ways that you identify elements, the attributes you select, and the types of values you put in them, it is very much it can have a commonality to make sure you're limiting the selectors, make sure you're limiting the attributes, and that you are choosing them on purpose. You don't use blank values unless you're doing it on purpose. And you got your various methods to identify elements as opposed to invisible ones by using greater than for height and stuff like that. Thanks for watching part 4 of this series of Basics of Application Modeler. I don't yet have any other videos for this series, but if you have any questions or comments, please leave a comment on that particular video, and I'll be sure to go back and note those and make a list. And then if I have enough of those, then I'll make a part 5 where we'll do a follow-up and I'll say, here's the things I forgot, or look at this, I said this completely wrong. Thanks for watching, and happy application modeling.